The silence in courtroom 4B wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. Every person in the gallery held their breath as the accusation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Worthless! The word echoed off the mahogany walls, spoken not with anger, but with a cold, terrifying indifference by the man who had once promised to love her forever. Elena looked at her hands stained with cheap paint and trembling, and felt her world collapsing. She had no money, no lawyer, no hope. Her ex-husband Marcus fixed his expensive cufflinks and smirked, thinking he had already won. But the heavy oak doors at the back of the room were about to open, and the man stepping through wasn't just coming to save her. He was coming to destroy everything Marcus thought he owned. "You think you know revenge? You haven't seen anything yet." The rain hammered against the tall, reinforced windows of the Seattle King County Courthouse, a rhythmic drumming that felt like a countdown. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of floor wax and old paper. Elena Vance sat alone at the defendant's table. She wore her only suit, a charcoal gray ensemble she had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. It was slightly too large in the shoulders, betraying the weight she had lost over the last 6 months of hell. Her hands, usually steady when holding a paintbrush, were gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had turned the color of bone. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was entirely different. It smelled of expensive cologne and victory. Marcus Thorne sat relaxed, leaning back in his leather chair as if he were lounging in the VIP section of a club, rather than fighting for custody of their 5-year-old daughter, Lily. He whispered something to his attorney, a shark of a man named Arthur Blackwood, and they both chuckled softly. "Order," Judge Harrison said, though his voice was tired. He adjusted his glasses, looking down at the pile of motions and affidavits that Marcus's legal team had buried the court in. "Mr. Blackwood, you may proceed with your closing statement regarding the financial motion." Arthur Blackwood stood up. He didn't just stand. He unfolded himself, buttoning his tailored Italian suit jacket with a precise, practiced movement. He walked toward the judge, ignoring Elena entirely, as if she were a piece of furniture that needed to be removed during a renovation. "Your Honor," Blackwood began, his voice smooth and baritone, "we are not here to question Ms. Vance's love for the child. We are here to discuss reality. And the reality is cold, hard mathematics." He turned, finally casting a glance at Elena. It wasn't a look of hatred. It was a look of pity, which was infinitely worse. "My client, Mr. Thorne, is the CEO of Thorne Logistics. He generated $4 million in revenue last quarter alone. He can provide the child with the best schools, private health care, and a stable, expansive home environment in Mercer Island." Blackwood paused for effect, walking back to his table and picking up a single thin piece of paper. He held it up like a dirty tissue. "Ms. Vance, on the other hand, lists her occupation as artist. In the last tax year, her reported income was less than $15,000. She lives in a studio apartment above a bakery in a neighborhood that has seen a 30% rise in crime in the last year." Elena felt the heat rise in her cheeks. "I sold 2 paintings last month," she whispered, but her voice didn't carry. "She has no savings." Blackwood continued, his voice rising. "She has no assets. She has no 401k. She relies on state assistance for health care, in the eyes of the financial world, and for the purpose of providing a secure future for a child." He turned to Marcus, who was watching Elena with cold, dead eyes. "She brings nothing to the table. She is a liability. She is, for all intents and purposes, worthless." The word hung in the air. Worthless. Elena felt a physical blow to her chest. She looked at Marcus silently, begging him to stop this. "Remember when we ate instant noodles on the floor of your dorm," she thought. "Remember when I worked 2 jobs so you could take that unpaid internship?" Marcus didn't blink. He just checked his Rolex, a platinum Daytona that cost more than Elena's entire life earnings, and looked bored. "I object!" Elena cried out, standing up. Her legs felt weak. "I am her mother. You can't put a price tag on that." "Sit down, Ms. Vance," Judge Harrison said sharply. "You are representing yourself, which is your right, but you will follow protocol." "He's twisting everything." Elena's voice cracked. Tears hot and humiliating pricked her eyes. "I supported him for years. I gave up my scholarship to the Rhode Island School of Design so he could start his company. I painted in the garage so he could have the office." "That is irrelevant history," Blackwood said dismissively. "We are dealing with the present, and in the present you cannot afford to buy the child a winter coat without checking your bank balance. My client is offering a generous settlement. You walk away. You sign full custody over to Mr. Thorne. You get visitation every other weekend supervised, and in exchange, he will not pursue you for the legal fees you have already forced him to incur." "Supervised?" Elena gasped. "I'm not a criminal. I'm a mother." "You are destitute, Ms. Vance." Marcus spoke for the first time. His voice was silky, the voice he used to close deals. "And poverty makes people desperate. Desperate people make bad choices. I'm just trying to protect Lily." "You're trying to erase me," Elena whispered. "If the shoe fits," Marcus murmured loud enough only for the front row to hear. Judge Harrison rubbed his temples. "I am inclined to agree with Mr. Blackwood's assessment of the financial stability required here. Unless Ms. Vance can prove a significant change in circumstances or hidden assets within the next hour, I am ready to rule on the primary custody motion." Elena slumped back into her chair. An hour. She had an hour to produce a miracle. She looked at her phone on the table. No messages, no missed calls. She was entirely alone. The court went into a brief recess. Elena didn't leave the room. She couldn't bear to face the hallway where Marcus would undoubtedly be laughing with his lawyers. She sat there staring at the grain of the wood table while the memories she had tried to suppress came flooding back. 7 years ago. They were in a cramped apartment in Portland. It was raining then, too. Marcus had been crying, actually crying, sitting on the edge of their mattress. "I can't do it, Elle," he had sobbed. "The investors pulled out. They said I don't look the part. I don't have the suit. I don't have the watch. They think I'm a joke." Elena had walked over to the corner of the room where her easel stood. On it was a landscape she had been working on for 3 months. It was her masterpiece, a depiction of a storm breaking over a rugged coastline, the light piercing through the gray clouds in a way that felt almost religious. Her professor had told her it could launch her career. She took the painting off the easel. She walked out the door down to the pawn shop on 4th Avenue, and then to a local gallery that had offered to buy it for a fraction of its worth as decor. She sold it for $400. She took that money and bought Marcus a vintage Omega watch and a second-hand Brooks Brothers suit. She tailored the suit herself, stitching it until his fingers bled, making sure it fit him like armor. "Wear this," she had told him, tying his tie. "You walk in there and you make them believe you own the place." He had hugged her then. "I'll make it up to you, Elle. I swear. When I make it, you'll have your own gallery. You'll never have to worry about money again." He got the investment. Thorne Logistics was born. And slowly the man she loved died, replaced by the CEO. The late nights at the office turned into weekends away. The gratitude turned into entitlement. When Lily was born, Marcus complained about the crying. When Elena asked for money for art supplies, he asked why she was wasting time on hobbies, when she should be managing the household staff he had hired. The divorce had been brutal. He had hidden assets in offshore accounts. Shell companies in the Caymans trusts in Delaware, places Elena's court-appointed lawyer during the divorce couldn't reach. He claimed the company was in debt while buying a penthouse in downtown Seattle. Now sitting in this courtroom, the betrayal felt complete. He wasn't just leaving her. He was rewriting history. He was turning her sacrifice into her failure. "Ms. Vance." The bailiff's voice snapped her back to reality. "Court is resuming in 5 minutes. Elena nodded numbly. She reached into her bag to grab a tissue and her fingers brushed against something hard and cold. It was an old brass paint tube key. She stared at it. It reminded her of the other painting. Not the one she sold for Marcus, but the one she had given away. 2 years ago, just before Marcus filed for divorce, Elena had been sketching in a park near the chaotic Pike Place market. An old man had been sitting on a bench feeding pigeons. He looked homeless, wearing a tattered coat, shivering despite the mild weather. People walked past him, avoiding eye contact, treating him like he was invisible, like he was worthless. Elena had felt a pang of kinship. She had bought 2 coffees and a sandwich and sat next to him. They didn't talk much. He seemed sad, burdened by a grief that was heavier than the sky. She had opened her portfolio. "Do you like art?" she had asked. The old man had looked at her sketches. His eyes, though red-rimmed, were sharp, an intense shade of blue. He stopped at a charcoal sketch of a lonely tree standing against a violent wind. "That one," the old man had rasped. "It looks like it's about to break." "No," Elena had said softly. "It's bending. That's how it survives. It bends so it doesn't break." The old man had stared at her for a long time. "You have a kind heart, girl. That's a dangerous thing to have in this city." Impulsively, she had torn the page out and signed it. "To a friend, Elena." She gave it to him. He tried to give her a crumpled $5 bill, but she refused. "Just promise me you won't break either," she had told him. She never saw him again. Just another ghost in the city. Why am I thinking of this now, she wondered. Maybe because I'm the one about to break. The door to the judge's chambers opened. Judge Harrison returned. Marcus and Mr. Blackwood walked back in, laughing at some private joke. Blackwood placed a heavy binder on the table with a loud thud. "Ready to finalize this?" Blackwood whispered to Elena as he passed. "If you sign now, Marcus says he'll let you keep your car. It's a generous offer for a 2015 Honda." Elena grit her teeth. She stood up as the judge sat. "Ms. Vance," Judge Harrison said, "have you reviewed the petitioner's final offer?" "I have, Your Honor." Elena said, her voice shaking but clear. "And I refuse. I will not sell my daughter." Marcus sighed loudly, rolling his eyes at the ceiling. "Very well," the judge said. "Then we will proceed to judgment, based on the financial evidence presented and the clear disparity in the ability to provide." Creak. The sound was low, but it cut through the courtroom noise like a knife. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom doors that were usually guarded and kept closed during session were slowly pushing open. Judge Harrison stopped speaking. "I explicitly ordered a closed session. Bailiff, remove whoever that is." The bailiff moved toward the door, his hand on his belt, but he stopped dead in his tracks. 2 men in dark suits walked in first. They weren't court security. They moved with the precise, lethal grace of private military contractors. They wore earpieces and scanned the room instantly. "Hey," the bailiff shouted. "You can't be in here." One of the men simply held up a hand, palm out, a gesture that said stop. Then a third man entered. He was elderly, leaning heavily on a cane made of polished black wood with a silver handle, but his frailty was an illusion. He wore a suit that made Marcus's Italian tailoring look like a costume from a discount rack. It was a 3-piece charcoal suit, immaculate, timeless. His hair was snow white, swept back. But it was his eyes that froze Elena in place. Intense, sharp blue eyes. The courtroom fell silent. Even Arthur Blackwood, usually unflappable, dropped his pen. His mouth hung open. "My apologies for the interruption, Judge Harrison," the old man said. His voice was gravel and honey quiet, but commanding absolute attention. "But I believe there has been a significant omission of facts regarding Ms. Vance's net worth." Marcus stood up, his face flushing red. "Who is this old geezer? Get him out of here." Arthur Blackwood grabbed Marcus's arm, yanking him down so hard the chair skidded. "Shut up!" Blackwood hissed, his face pale as a sheet. "Shut up, you idiot!" "Why?" Marcus demanded. "That's Julian Sterling." Blackwood whispered, the fear audible in his voice. The name rippled through the courtroom. Even the stenographer stopped typing. Julian Sterling, the founder of Sterling Industries. The man who owned half the fiber optic networks in the hemisphere. A billionaire recluse who hadn't been seen in public for 5 years. A man known in the business world simply as the architect. And he was walking straight toward Elena. Elena couldn't breathe. The old man, the homeless man from the park, was Julian Sterling. He stopped at the defendant's table. Up close, he smelled of sandalwood and expensive tobacco. He looked down at Elena, his eyes softening just a fraction. "Hello, Elena," he said. "It was you," she whispered. "The coffee, the park." "You gave me the only thing of value you had that day," Sterling said. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't want anything from me. In my world, that makes you a unicorn." "Your Honor," Blackwood stammered, trying to regain control. "Mr. Sterling has no standing in this court. This is a private custody hearing." Sterling turned slowly to face Blackwood. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at the lawyer with the kind of expression one uses for a cockroach. "I am here as a witness to Ms. Vance's assets," Sterling said. He gestured to one of his bodyguards, who stepped forward and placed a thick leather portfolio on the judge's bench. "What is this?" Judge Harrison asked, though he looked intrigued. "That," Sterling said, "is a contract of exclusivity." Sterling turned to the gallery, addressing the room. 3 days ago, the Sterling Foundation acquired the exclusive rights to the entire future portfolio of the artist known as Elena Vance. We have also commissioned a retrospective of her past works. Marcus scoffed a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Please. Her work is garbage. She sold a painting for $50. Sterling smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "That is because the market was ignorant. I have corrected the market." He turned back to the judge. "The initial retainer for this contract has already been wired to an escrow account in Ms. Vance's name. The amount is $5 million. The silence in the room was absolute. "$5 million, Elena stammered. "Post-tax," Sterling clarified, "with a stipulated annual salary of $1 million for her role as the creative director of the new Sterling Art Initiative." Sterling looked at Marcus. "Which means, by my calculation, Ms. Vance's current liquidity exceeds yours, Mr. Thorne, especially considering the news that will break in roughly." He checked a pocket watch attached to his vest. 10 minutes. "What news?" Marcus demanded, sweat beading on his forehead. "Mr. Blackwood," Sterling said, addressing the lawyer, "you represent Thorne Logistics, correct?" Yes, I do," Blackwood said, loosening his tie. "Then you might want to check your phone," Sterling said. "It seems the Securities and Exchange Commission has just launched a formal investigation into Thorne Logistics regarding offshore embezzlement and tax fraud. I believe the tip came from an anonymous source, though they were very detailed about the shell companies in the Caymans." Marcus's face went white. He scrambled for his phone. "This is ridiculous," Marcus shouted. "You can't prove anything." "I don't need to prove it," Sterling said calmly. "I just needed to point the flashlight. The rats usually do the rest." "Your Honor," Sterling said, turning back to the bench, "Ms. Vance is now one of the wealthiest women in this district. She has the means, the stability, and the character to raise her daughter, unlike the man sitting across from her who I suspect will be indicted before lunch." Judge Harrison looked at the document in front of him. He looked at the bank confirmation attached to it. He looked at Elena, who was staring at Sterling in shock. "Ms. Vance," the judge asked gently, "is this true? Do you accept this contract?" Elena looked at Sterling. He gave her a tiny nod. "Bend, don't break." She stood up. She looked at Marcus, who was frantically whispering to a terrified Blackwood. She looked at the judge. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing out strong for the first time. "I accept." The gavel banged a wooden thunderclap that signaled the end of Elena's old life. But the chaos was just beginning. "Court is adjourned," Judge Harrison bellowed over the rising din. "Mr. Thorne, you are to surrender your passport immediately. Ms. Vance temporary full custody is granted pending the investigation." Elena felt her knees give way. She would have collapsed if not for the firm grip of one of Julian Sterling's security agents, a man named Silas. He was built like a tank with a scar running through his left eyebrow and the calm demeanor of someone who had seen war zones. "Steady, ma'am," Silas murmured. "We need to move. The press is already outside." Across the aisle, the composure of Marcus Thorne had shattered completely. He wasn't looking at the judge. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through messages that were clearly delivering bad news. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. "Arthur!" Marcus grabbed his lawyer by the lapels. "Fix this. Stop the SEC. Call the senator." Arthur Blackwood peeled Marcus's hands off his suit. The lawyer's eyes were darting around the room, calculating his own survival. "I can't fix federal indictments, Marcus. And I can't represent you if the funds are frozen. I'm recusing myself." "You coward!" Marcus screamed. "I made you—" "Mr. Thorne." Two bailiffs moved in. "We need you to come with us for processing regarding the flight risk assessment." Marcus spun around, his eyes locking onto Elena. For a second, the mask of the sophisticated CEO fell away entirely, revealing the predator underneath. He lunged toward her, ignoring the bailiffs. "You think this is over?" he hissed, his voice spraying spittle. "You think some old man with a checkbook can protect you? You have no idea whose money I was holding, Elena. You have no idea who you just stole from." Silas stepped in front of Elena, a human wall. He didn't push Marcus. He just stood there, radiating a threat so potent that Marcus skidded to a halt. "Back away," Silas said. It wasn't a shout, it was a command. Marcus sneered, straightening his jacket, though his hands were shaking. "Enjoy the victory lap, Elena. But remember, accidents happen, especially to little girls." The color drained from Elena's face. "Don't you dare threaten Lily." "I'm not threatening," Marcus whispered, a cruel smile playing on his lips as the bailiffs finally grabbed his arms. "I'm forecasting." As they dragged him away, Julian Sterling stepped up beside Elena. He tapped his cane on the floor, his expression grave. "He's desperate," Sterling said. "And desperate men are dangerous. We need to leave. Now." They moved through the back corridors of the courthouse, avoiding the swarm of reporters at the front steps. They emerged into the loading dock, where a convoy of 3 black armored SUVs was waiting. The rain was coming down harder now, washing the grime of the city into the gutters. Elena climbed into the middle vehicle, the plush leather interior, a stark contrast to the cold, hard bench she had been sitting on for hours. Sterling sat opposite her. "Where are we going?" Elena asked, her hands still trembling. "I need to pick up Lily from school. Her class ends at 300. "My team is already en route to the school," Sterling said calmly. "Silas is coordinating the extraction. We're taking you both to a secure location outside the city, my estate in the Cascades." "Extraction." Elena frowned. "Mr. Sterling, I am incredibly grateful for what you did in there. You saved my life. But extraction bodyguards, isn't this extreme? Marcus is a white-collar criminal. He commits fraud. He doesn't—" Sterling sighed. He pressed a button on the console next to him, and a privacy partition slid up, separating them from the driver. He opened a mini-fridge, poured a glass of water, and handed it to her. "Elena, do you know what Thorne Logistics actually ships?" "Computer parts," Elena said automatically. "Server racks. Tech hardware." "That's the manifest," Sterling corrected. "But for the last 3 years, Marcus has been leveraging his shipping routes to bypass customs for a client known as the Viper Group. They are an international syndicate moving high-grade military tech into embargoed countries." Elena stared at him. The glass of water shook in her hand. "Military tech, Marcus—" "He got greedy," Sterling explained. "The contract I mentioned, the one that made him millions. It wasn't for his brilliance. It was for his silence. He was laundering money for them. When I triggered the SEC investigation, I didn't just freeze his assets. I froze their money." Sterling leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "He told the truth back there. He owes money to people who don't file lawsuits. They file death certificates, and if they can't get the money from him, they will look for leverage to force him to unlock the accounts. You and Lily are that leverage. Elena felt nausea rise in her throat. The man she had slept beside the father of her child had turned their lives into collateral for warlords. "Why?" she whispered. "Why help me?" "You bought my painting for $5. That doesn't explain this." Sterling looked out the window at the rain-streaked city passing by. "Years ago I had a daughter. She was an artist too. Talented, sensitive. She married a man much like Marcus. He broke her spirit bit by bit. I was too busy building my empire to notice until it was too late. She took her own life." He turned back to Elena, his eyes glistening with old grief. "When I saw you in the park that day, you had that same look in your eyes. The look of someone whose light is being extinguished. But you were still fighting. You told me to bend, not break. I couldn't save my daughter, Elena. But I have the power, the money, and the anger to save you." The car phone buzzed. Sterling picked it up. "Report." He listened for a moment, and his expression hardened. The lines on his forehead deepened. "Understood. Engage Protocol 0. Do not let them take the girl." He hung up his knuckles white on the receiver. "What?" Elena gripped his arm. "What is it?" "Marcus made a call from the holding cell before his phone was confiscated." Sterling said, his voice grim. "He didn't call a lawyer. He called a cleanup crew. They aren't waiting for tonight. They're at the school." St. Mary's Elementary was a red brick fortress of innocence nestled in the suburbs of Bellevue. It was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be a place of crayons and recess. But as the black SUV tore through the school gates, ignoring the speed bumps, Elena saw that the innocence had been shattered. 2 unmarked gray vans were parked haphazardly on the curb near the playground. Men in maintenance uniforms were moving toward the side gate, the gate that led directly to the kindergarten wing. They weren't carrying toolboxes. They were carrying duffel bags that hung heavy, the unmistakable shape of tactical gear inside. "Stay in the car," Silas barked from the front seat as the SUV screeched to a halt. "That's my daughter," Elena screamed, grappling with the door handle. "Elena, no!" Sterling shouted, but she was already out. The maternal instinct overrode every survival circuit in her brain. She didn't care about syndicates or money launderers. She only knew that wolves were walking toward her lamb. The rain was torrential now. Elena's heels slipped on the wet asphalt as she sprinted toward the playground fence. Through the chain link, she could see the children lined up under the awning waiting for dismissal. She saw Lily. Her daughter was wearing a yellow raincoat, holding her teacher's hand, looking at a puddle. "Lily!" Elena screamed. The sound of her name made Lily look up. Her face lit up. "Mommy!" At that exact moment, the maintenance men reached the gate. One of them produced a bolt cutter and snapped the lock in a single motion. They shoved the gate open. "Grab the girl!" one of them shouted. The teacher, Mrs. Gable, gasped and tried to pull Lily back, but a man shoved her aside with brutal force. Mrs. Gable fell onto the wet concrete. "No!" Elena reached the fence, her fingers curling into the wire mesh. She was on the wrong side. She was 20 feet away, separated by steel. The lead kidnapper, a man with a shaved head and a neck tattoo of a scorpion, grabbed Lily by the arm. Lily screamed, dropping her small backpack. "Let her go!" Elena shrieked, tearing at the fence as if she could rip it apart with her bare hands. Suddenly a deafening crack echoed through the playground. The scorpion-tattooed man yelled and released Lily, clutching his shoulder. Blood blossomed on his gray uniform. Elena spun around. Silas was standing by the hood of the SUV, a suppressed pistol in his hand, his stance perfect. "Get down!" Silas roared at the teachers and children. The playground erupted into chaos. Kids screamed and scattered. The kidnappers dropped their duffel bags, pulling out submachine guns. "Cover fire!" the leader yelled. Bullets sparked against the pavement and the brick walls. Elena hit the ground, crawling through the mud toward the gate opening. She had to get to Lily. Silas and 2 other agents from the convoy advanced, moving with military precision. They laid down a suppressing fire that forced the kidnappers to duck behind the playground equipment. "Move up! Secure the target!" Silas commanded into his comms. Elena scrambled through the open gate. She was in the line of fire. She didn't care. She saw Lily huddled behind a large plastic slide, crying, covering her ears. "Lily!" Elena lunged forward, sliding on the wet grass, and threw her body over her daughter. A bullet pinged off the metal pole of the slide inches from Elena's head. She felt the vibration of the impact. "Mommy, I'm scared," Lily sobbed into Elena's chest. "I've got you, baby. I've got you," Elena whispered, pressing Lily's face into her coat so she wouldn't see the violence. "Target secure," Silas shouted. He was close now. He grabbed Elena by the back of her coat and hauled her up, keeping his body between them and the shooters. "Run to the car now!" They ran. It was a blur of noise and adrenaline. The agents provided a wall of fire, pinning the kidnappers down. Elena clutched Lily so tight her arms burned, sprinting back toward the idling SUVs. Sterling was holding the door open, his face pale. "Get in! Get in!" Elena dove into the back seat, pulling Lily in after her. Silas jumped into the front passenger seat, slamming the door. "Go, go, go!" Silas yelled at the driver. The SUV roared, tires spinning on the wet pavement before finding traction. They fishtailed out of the school driveway, smashing through the wooden exit barrier. Behind them, the gray vans were already turning to pursue. "Are they following?" Sterling asked, his voice tight. Silas checked the side mirror. "Two vehicles. High speed. They aren't giving up." Elena checked Lily. The little girl was shaking, her yellow raincoat smeared with mud, but she was physically unharmed. Elena hugged her, rocking back and forth. "It's okay, Lily. We're playing a game." Elena lied, her voice cracking. "A high-speed spy game." "I don't like this game," Lily whimpered. "Neither do I," Elena thought. She looked at Sterling. "Who are those men?" "Mercenaries," Silas answered from the front seat, reloading his weapon. "Hired muscle. Likely former Eastern Bloc military. Marcus must have promised them a hell of a payday, or told them you have the encryption keys to the accounts." "Encryption keys?" Elena asked. "I don't have anything. I paint landscapes." "Marcus probably used your birthday or Lily's or something only you would know as the passcodes," Sterling deduced. "He implicated you without you even knowing. To them, you aren't just a witness. You're the walking vault." The SUV swerved violently to the left. "Contact rear!" the driver shouted. One of the gray vans had caught up. A man was leaning out of the passenger window, a gun aimed at their tires. Bam! The back window of the SUV shattered, raining safety glass onto the leather seats. Elena screamed, shielding Lily's head. "Silas," Sterling barked. "On it," Silas said. He pressed a button on the dashboard. The rear bumper of the SUV dropped open. Caltrop's spiked metal stars spilled out onto the road, bouncing in the rain. The lead chase van hit them instantly. The tires blew out with a sound like a cannon shot. The van spun out of control, hydroplaning across the slick road, flipping over the median and crashing into a lamppost. "One down," Silas said coolly. "One to go." But the second van was smarter. It hung back, dodging the debris. And then from a side street, a third vehicle, a heavy truck, slammed into the side of the lead SUV in Sterling's convoy. The lead SUV crumpled, spinning off the road. "They have reinforcements," the driver yelled. "We're being herded." "Where?" Sterling demanded. "Toward the bridge," Silas said. "They want to box us in on the Lake Washington Bridge. Nowhere to run." Elena looked out the window. They were speeding toward the long floating bridge that connected the city to the eastern suburbs. The water below was dark and choppy. "We can't take the bridge," Elena said, her mind racing. She knew this city. She knew every alley and shortcut from her days delivering art supplies. "It's a trap. If they block both ends, we're sitting ducks." "We have to cross the water to get to the safe house," the driver argued. "No," Elena said, her eyes snapping to the GPS screen. "Take the lower-level express lanes, then cut through the arboretum. It's narrow. Their truck won't fit." Silas looked at her surprised. "Trust me," Elena yelled. "I lived in a van for 3 months near there. I know the roads." "Do it," Sterling ordered. The driver yanked the wheel, swerving away from the bridge entrance and diving down a narrow off-ramp that looked like a service road. The heavy truck behind them tried to follow, but clipped the concrete barrier, sparks flying, and was forced to slow down. They sped into the dense tree-lined roads of the Arboretum. The canopy of trees blocked the rain, creating a dark green tunnel. "We lost them," the driver breathed after a few minutes of silence. Elena slumped back against the seat, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep from pure exhaustion. "You did good," Silas said, looking back at her. "That was good tactical thinking." Elena looked at her hands. They were covered in mud and her daughter's tears. She wasn't an artist anymore. She wasn't a victim. "I'm not letting them take her," Elena whispered, her voice cold and hard. "If they want a war, Marcus is going to regret starting one." Sterling watched her, a look of grim approval on his face. "We're going to the safe house, but we can't stay there long. We need to go on the offensive. We need to find the ledger Marcus is hiding." "I know where it is," Elena said suddenly. Sterling and Silas both turned to her. "What?" "The painting," Elena said, her eyes widening as the realization hit her. "The one I sold for $400 to buy his suit. He bought it back 3 years ago. He hung it in his private office. He told me he bought it because he missed my talent, but he never looked at it. He put it in a frame that was too thick." She looked at Sterling. "He didn't buy it for the art. He bought it because it's the only thing in his office nobody would ever think to look inside. The ledger is in the frame." Sterling smiled a slow, dangerous smile. "Then we aren't just going to hide Elena. We're going to go get it." The safe house was a fortress of glass and steel hidden deep within the Cascade foothills, surrounded by dense pine forests that whispered in the wind. But inside, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Lily was asleep in a secure bedroom guarded by 2 agents. In the main command center, Julian Sterling stood over a digital map of downtown Seattle, specifically the 40-story spire of Thorn Logistics. "It's a suicide mission," Silas said, cleaning his weapon. "The building is on lockdown. Marcus knows we're coming for him. He's probably doubled the security detail." "He doesn't know what we're coming for," Elena interjected. She had changed out of her ruined suit into tactical gear. Sterling's team had provided black cargo pants and a fitted jacket. She looked different. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard resolve. "He thinks I'm running. He thinks I'm hiding. He doesn't think I'm crazy enough to walk back into his office." "Elena is right," Sterling said, tracing a line on the map. "Marcus is arrogant. He views her as a liability, not a threat. That is his blind spot. But we have a window of approximately 20 minutes. The SEC freezes his assets at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. He will be in that office tonight clearing out everything before the feds arrive. If he destroys that ledger, we lose our leverage. If we lose the leverage, the Viper Group will hunt you forever." "Then we go tonight," Elena said. "How do we get in?" Sterling smiled, tapping his cane. "Thorn Logistics just installed a new HVAC system on the roof. Guess who manufactured the control chips? Sterling Industries. I have a back door into the building's environmental controls. We can't shut down the cameras, but we can trigger a localized chemical alarm. We'll clear the top floor. 1:00 a.m., Thorn Logistics Tower." The storm had turned into a gale. Rain lashed against the glass facade of the skyscraper. Inside the lobby was quiet, guarded by 3 private security contractors. Suddenly the fire alarm system shrieked, not the standard buzzer, but a piercing, oscillating tone indicating a chemical hazard. "Attention! Hazardous gas detected on floors 38 through 40. Evacuate immediately." The guards in the lobby checked their monitors. "What the hell is it, a leak? Sensors are showing chlorine gas in the ventilation," the head guard radioed. "Seal the elevators. Nobody goes up." But nobody needed to go up. They were already there. 30 minutes earlier, a Sterling Industries maintenance helicopter had fought the wind to lower two figures onto the helipad, Silas and Elena. They were now rappelling down the side of the building, the wind threatening to smash them against the glass. Elena's heart hammered in her throat, but she didn't freeze. She focused on the window of the corner office, Marcus's office. Silas used a laser glass cutter, carving a perfect circle in the reinforced pane. He applied a suction cup, pulled the glass free, and swung inside. He scanned the room with thermal goggles. "Clear," he whispered. The alarm scared off the secretaries. "But Marcus—" Silas paused. He pointed to the heavy oak door leading to the hallway. It was locked from the inside. "He's not here yet," Elena whispered, climbing through the window. She landed on the plush carpet she had once picked out for him. The office reeked of stale scotch and panic. File cabinets were open papers strewn everywhere. A shredder in the corner was jammed, overflowing with confetti. "He's packing," Silas said. "We have maybe 5 minutes before he comes back from the vault, or wherever he is." Elena moved to the far wall. There it was. The storm. It was the painting she had sold to buy his suit. The brushstrokes were violent, the gray clouds clashing with the sea. It was a painting about turmoil, about the moment before destruction. Marcus had framed it in a gaudy, thick gold frame that clashed with the art. It looked like a cage. "Hello, old friend," Elena murmured. She grabbed the heavy frame. It was bolted to the wall. "Silas, the pry bar," she ordered. Silas handed her a tactical crowbar. Elena jammed it behind the gold molding. She didn't care about damaging the wall. She heaved with all her strength. Crack! The plaster gave way. The painting swung outward on a hidden hinge. Behind the canvas cut into the drywall was a wall safe. But Elena didn't look at the safe. She looked at the back of the painting frame itself. There, taped to the wooden stretcher bars with industrial duct tape, was a black hard drive and a physical leather-bound notebook. He didn't trust the safe, Elena realized. He knew safes can be cracked, but nobody looks at the back of worthless decoration. She ripped the notebook free and opened it. It was a manual ledger. Names, dates, coordinates. Shipment 404 Anti-Air Guidance Systems. Destination Yemen. Payment $12 million via Shell Corp Alpha. "We got it," Elena breathed. "This is everything. This puts him away for life." "Good," Silas said, raising his rifle toward the door. "Because company's here." The lock on the office door clicked. Elena shoved the notebook into her jacket. But before they could move toward the window, the door burst open. It wasn't just Marcus. 3 men in dark suits entered, first weapons raised. And behind them walked Marcus, looking disheveled. His tie undone, sweat soaking his shirt. But he wasn't looking at Elena with fear anymore. He was smiling. "I knew it." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "I knew you'd come for the art. You always were sentimental, Elena. It's your tragic flaw." Silas aimed his rifle, but he was outnumbered 3-1. The men spread out, flanking them. "Drop the gun," Marcus commanded Silas, "or I tell my friends here to turn your artist client into abstract art." Silas calculated the odds. They were bad. Slowly he lowered his rifle and set it on the floor. "Kick it away," Marcus snarled. Silas complied. Marcus walked into the room, pouring himself a drink from a crystal decanter with a shaking hand. He took a long swallow, then turned to Elena. "You really thought you could outsmart me," Marcus sneered. "I built this empire while you were painting pretty pictures. I own this city." "You own nothing," Elena said, her voice steady. "I have the ledger, Marcus. I have the proof. The Viper Group isn't going to be happy when they find out you kept a record of their crimes." Marcus's face twitched. "Give it to me." "No," Elena said. Marcus pulled a pistol from his waistband, a sleek silver thing that looked like a toy in his hand. He pointed it at her chest. "I said give it to me. I'm leaving the country tonight, Elena, and I'm taking that book. You're just a loose end." "You won't shoot me," Elena said, stepping forward. "Because if you do, you'll never find the digital backup I just uploaded." It was a bluff. There was no upload. But Elena channeled every ounce of confidence she had learned from watching Julian Sterling. Marcus hesitated. His eyes darted to the computer screen, then back to her. "You're lying," he whispered. "Am I?" Elena challenged. "Check your phone. I sent a copy to the SEC 5 minutes ago. The timestamp is already logged." For a split second, Marcus panicked. He looked down at his phone. That was the mistake. "Now!" Elena screamed. She grabbed the heavy brass sculpture from Marcus's desk, a stylized bull, and hurled it at the gunman on the right. At the same instant, Silas moved. He didn't go for his gun. He went for the lights. He threw a flashbang grenade he had palmed from his vest. Bang! A blinding white light filled the room, accompanied by a deafening concussion. Marcus screamed, clutching his eyes. The gunman fired blindly, bullets tearing into the ceiling and the mahogany desk. Elena dove behind the heavy leather sofa. She could hear the sickening crunch of hand-to-hand combat as Silas engaged the blinded mercenaries. "Kill them!" Marcus shrieked, stumbling backward, waving his gun. "Kill them all!" Elena saw Marcus retreating toward the private elevator in the corner of the room. He was escaping. If he left with the Viper Group's money, he would vanish. He would haunt her and Lily forever. She couldn't let him leave. Elena scrambled over the desk. Marcus was punching the elevator button, his vision clearing. He saw her coming and raised his gun. "You stupid bit!" Elena didn't stop. She grabbed the edge of the storm painting, the heavy, gold-framed canvas she had just pried open, and swung it like a shield. Marcus fired. The bullet slammed into the painting, punching through the canvas, through the storm clouds she had painted years ago. But the thick wood of the frame and the backing absorbed the impact. Elena didn't slow down. She slammed the painting into Marcus, driving the heavy frame into his chest. He grunted, the wind knocked out of him, and fell backward into the open elevator car. Elena dropped the painting and stood over him. He scrambled back, trying to raise the gun again, but Elena stomped on his wrist. Hard. Something crunched. Marcus screamed and dropped the weapon. Elena kicked the gun out of the elevator. She hit the emergency stop button. Marcus lay there, clutching his broken wrist, looking up at her. He looked small, pathetic. The powerful CEO was gone, replaced by a frightened man in a ruined suit. "Elena, please." He gasped, tears streaming down his face. "Please, we can make a deal. I have millions in the Cayman accounts. I can give you half. We can start over." Elena looked down at him. She looked at the painting lying on the floor, her masterpiece now with a bullet hole through the center. "You still don't get it," she said softly. "You think everything can be bought." She reached into her jacket and pulled out the black ledger. "You called me worthless," Elena said. "You told the court I had zero value. But this book is worth your life." "Elena, don't," Marcus begged. "If you give that to the feds, the Vipers will kill me in prison. They'll butcher me." "Then you better hope you have a good lawyer," Elena said. She stepped out of the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. "Goodbye, Marcus." The doors slid shut on his screaming face. Inside the office, silence had returned. Silas stood amidst 3 unconscious mercenaries. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he was standing. He looked at Elena. He looked at the bullet hole in the painting. "You okay?" Silas asked. Elena took a deep breath. She felt the adrenaline fading, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But beneath the tiredness there was something else. Freedom. "I'm fine," she said. "Let's go home." 6 months later. The gallery was crowded. Champagne flutes clinked and the air buzzed with the hushed whispers of Seattle's elite. The sign above the door read, "The Vance Sterling Initiative." Elena stood in the center of the room wearing a tailored emerald gown that fit her perfectly. She wasn't hiding in the corner anymore. She was the host. "Mommy! Look!" Lily, now 6 years old and beaming, ran up to her holding a cookie. "Careful with the crumbs, Goose." Elena laughed, wiping Lily's face. "Julian is here," Lily pointed. Julian Sterling walked through the crowd, the sea of people parting for him. He looked healthier, his eyes bright. The turnout is impressive, Sterling said, looking around. And the sales figures are even better. You have a good eye for talent, Elena. I learned from the best, Elena smiled. And the other matter? Sterling asked quietly. Sentencing was today, Elena said, her voice remaining calm. Marcus got 25 years. No parole. The Viper Group remnants have been dismantled by Interpol thanks to the ledger. Justice? Sterling nodded. He walked over to the centerpiece of the exhibit. It wasn't a new painting. It was an old one. A seascape of a storm, violent and dark. In the center of the canvas was a jagged bullet hole preserved perfectly behind museum glass. The plaque beneath it didn't list a price. It simply read, Worthless Artist Elena Vance Collection of the Artist. Not for sale. Why keep the title? Sterling asked, studying the damage. Elena looked at the bullet hole, remembering the moment she swung that frame. She remembered the fear, the rain, and the man who had tried to erase her. Because he was right, Elena said, taking her daughter's hand. To him I was worthless, and that mistake cost him everything. She looked at Sterling, then down at Lily. And because now I know what priceless actually feels like. Marcus thought power came from a bank account. He thought he could discard people like receipts. But in the end, the woman he called worthless was the only one with the strength to bring down his empire. It's a reminder that your value isn't defined by someone else's opinion, and sometimes the people who are underestimated are the most dangerous ones to cross. If you were Elena, would you have taken the deal in the elevator, half the millions to let him go? Or would you have done exactly what she did? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge and redemption, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.
The sound of tearing silk cut through the murmur of the party like a gunshot. In the sudden silence, all eyes were on Eudora, standing on the stage next to her husband, Jasper, the billionaire titan. He looked down at the ruined bodice of her vintage dress, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. Time for an upgrade, he whispered, for only her to hear. The crowd held its breath, expecting tears. A hasty retreat, a woman broken. They didn't know Eudora. They didn't see the ice forming in her eyes. She wasn't broken. She was being unleashed. What she did next wouldn't just end the party. It would detonate an empire. The morning of the party dawned with a sterile, oppressive perfection, much like Eudora's marriage. Sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Manhattan penthouse, glinted off surfaces so polished they seemed to hold no memory. For 5 years, Eudora had lived within these walls, a beautiful object placed just so in the grand museum of Jasper Croft's life. Jasper was a man carved from ambition and old money, the CEO of Croft Holdings, a global real estate empire he'd inherited and expanded with ruthless precision. He moved through the world as if he owned it, and in many ways he did. He had certainly come to own her. "You're wearing that?" he asked, his voice devoid of curiosity. He didn't look up from the tablet displaying a stream of stock market data. He was already dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, looking less like a man getting ready for a party, and more like a predator preparing for a hunt. Eudora looked down at the dress laid out on their king-sized bed. It was a deep emerald silk, a vintage piece from the 1950s that she had painstakingly restored herself. It had belonged to her grandmother, a woman of quiet strength and artistic spirit, everything Eudora felt she was losing. "I love this dress," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "It's old, Eudora. It looks sentimental. This party is about the future, not the past." He finally looked at her, his steel-grey eyes performing a swift, dismissive calculation. "Wear the diamond necklace I bought you in Geneva, and the blue gown, the one from Chanel." The blue gown was his choice, a beautiful but cold garment that made her feel like a mannequin. The diamonds were heavy, a glittering collar that always felt more like a leash. The party he'd told her was to celebrate the launch of the Olympus project, his most audacious venture, yet a multi-billion-dollar luxury development set to redefine the city's skyline. But Eudora knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that it was more than that. The air in their home had been thick with secrets for months. His phone buzzed on the marble nightstand, the screen lighting up. He was careless, so assured of her submission that he didn't even bother to hide it. A name flashed for a fraction of a second before he swiped it away: Isabella. A cold knot tightened in Eudora's stomach. It wasn't the first time she'd seen the name. There had been late-night texts he claimed were international business, a lingering scent of a perfume that wasn't hers on his suit jackets, amouage, a scent far too bold for Eudora's preference for subtle florals. "Who's Isabella?" she asked, the words tasting like glass. Jasper's focus didn't waver from his screen. "Isabella Ricci. She's the CEO of Ricci Innovations, a key investor in the Olympus project. You'll meet her tonight. Be polite." The casualness of his lie was more painful than a slap. Eudora had seen the whispers in the society pages, the speculative articles about the power partnership between Croft and Ricci. They called Isabella a visionary, a firebrand, a woman who matched Jasper's ambition. They never mentioned Jasper's wife. In their world, Eudora was becoming invisible. She walked into the cavernous closet, her bare feet silent on the plush carpet. She ignored the blue Chanel gown and reached for her emerald dress. As she slipped the cool silk over her skin, it felt like armor. It was a small act of defiance, perhaps the only one she had left. As she fastened the delicate buttons at her back, she thought of her father. He had been a brilliant architect, a man of integrity, who had warned her about Jasper. "He doesn't see a partner, Ellie," he had said before he passed away. "He sees an acquisition." She hadn't listened, blinded by Jasper's charm and the dizzying world he offered. Later, as they stood by the door waiting for the elevator, Jasper's eyes finally landed on her dress. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "I see you decided to ignore my advice." "It's just a dress, Jasper." "Nothing is just a dress, Eudora." He corrected his tone sharp. "Everything is a message. That dress says you're clinging to the past. Tonight I need you to represent my future." He reached out and adjusted her strap, his touch cold and proprietary. "Just smile, look beautiful, and don't say anything important. Can you manage that?" As the elevator doors opened, she met his gaze in the mirrored surface. Her reflection looked pale, a ghost in a green dress. But behind the fear in her eyes, a tiny ember of anger began to glow. She had been a ghost in her own life for too long. Tonight, something had to change. She just didn't yet know that Jasper himself would provide the match to set her world on fire. The party was being held at the observatory, a triple-height event space on the 90th floor of a skyscraper Jasper's company owned. The views were breathtaking, the city lights, a sprawling galaxy of diamonds below. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved through the throng of guests with trays of champagne and impossibly intricate canapes. The air hummed with power, the collective murmur of the city's elite bankers, politicians, tech moguls, and socialites. Eudora played her part as she always did. a serene smile fixed on her face, a champagne flute held delicately in her hand. She was the perfect hostess, the gracious wife nodding and murmuring pleasantries while feeling utterly disconnected, as if she were watching a film of her own life. Jasper left her side almost immediately, drawn into the magnetic center of the room. And there, waiting for him, was Isabella Ricci. Seeing her in person was like being struck by lightning. Isabella was everything the articles promised, tall, raven-haired, with eyes that missed nothing, and a smile that was both dazzling and predatory. She wore a crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin, a stark, confident slash of color in the sea of muted tones. She and Jasper looked like a matched set, two perfectly honed weapons of industry. Eudora watched them from across the room. She saw the way Jasper's hand rested on the small of Isabella's back, a gesture of casual intimacy that was more damning than a kiss. She saw the way they leaned in to speak, their heads close together, sharing secrets in a room full of people. They were a team, and Eudora was the inconvenient secret that hadn't yet been disposed of. Feeling a wave of nausea, she excused herself and made her way toward the powder room, needing a moment to breathe. As she passed a secluded alcove, she heard familiar voices. It was two of the board members' wives' women, who had always treated her with a cloying, condescending sweetness. "Can't believe he brought her here tonight," one of them, Beatrice, whispered. "It's one thing to have a bit on the side, but to parade her in front of everyone. And his wife, it's just cruel." "Jasper doesn't care about cruelty. He cares about power," the other Margaret replied. "Isabella Ricci isn't just a fling. Her company's tech is the entire backbone of the Olympus project. He needs her, and from the looks of it, he wants her too. I heard he's already had the lawyers draft the divorce papers. The announcement is imminent." Poor Eudora. She's a sweet girl, but she was never in his league. She's artistic. Jasper needs a killer. The word struck Eudora with physical force. Divorce papers. The world tilted, the ambient noise of the party fading to a dull roar in her ears. She leaned against the cold wall, steadying herself. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a pre-written ending to her story, an ending in which she was simply edited out. She returned to the party, but something inside her had irrevocably shifted. The shock was crystallizing into a cold, hard clarity. She looked at the powerful people in the room, the ones who smiled at her with pity, and she realized they were not her judges. They were just an audience. Her eyes found her best friend Chloe, a sharp-witted journalist who had navigated her way into the event. Chloe met her gaze from across the room, and her smile faltered, replaced by a look of concern. She knew Eudora too well. With a subtle nod, Chloe began to move toward her. "I need to get into Jasper's office," Eudora whispered urgently when Chloe reached her side. "His private office. Here in this building." Chloe's eyes widened. "Ellie, what's going on? They're not just having an affair. He's leaving me. The women in the bathroom said the divorce papers are already drawn up. I need to know. I need to see it for myself." Chloe, ever the pragmatist, didn't waste time with platitudes. "His office is on the 92nd floor. The executive elevator needs a key card, but the service elevator might be our best bet. I'll create a distraction." 5 minutes later, a loud crash echoed from the bar area as Chloe, with theatrical clumsiness, tripped into a waiter, sending a pyramid of champagne flutes cascading to the floor. As all eyes turned to the commotion, Eudora slipped away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found the service corridor, a stark, utilitarian space, that was a world away from the opulence of the party. The service elevator whirred to life, carrying her 2 floors up. The 92nd floor was dark and silent, a ghost town of executive power. Jasper's office was at the end of the hall, a corner suite with glass walls overlooking the city. The door was locked. Panic seized her for a moment, but then she remembered the emergency code he used for everything his father's birthday. She punched in the numbers. The lock clicked open. The office was a monument to Jasper's ego. A massive mahogany desk, abstract art that cost more than a house, and a faint scent of his expensive cologne. She went straight to the desk. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she would know it when she saw it. In the bottom drawer beneath a stack of blueprints was a locked leather portfolio. Her hands trembled as she tried the same code. It opened. Inside, nestled between financial projections for the Olympus project, was a thick folder from Jasper's personal attorney. The first document was a draft of a divorce settlement. It was brutal. It cited a non-disclosure agreement she'd signed years ago, offering her a pittance to walk away quietly and disappear. The second document was a prenuptial agreement. But it wasn't for her. It was for Jasper Croft and Isabella Ricci. But then she saw it. Tucked behind the legal documents was another set of papers, something that didn't belong. It was a separate ledger detailing a series of wire transfers. Money was being moved from Croft Holdings' main pension fund into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The same shell corporation that was providing the initial undisclosed funding for the Olympus project. He wasn't just replacing his wife. He was stealing from his own employees to fund his new empire with his new queen. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it stole her breath away. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a federal crime. Her phone buzzed. It was Chloe. "They're starting the speeches. He's looking for you." Eudora took out her phone. With shaking hands, she photographed every single page of the ledger, every damning transfer, every illegal transaction. She sent the files to a secure encrypted email account she'd created years ago and never used. As she placed the portfolio back in the drawer, she saw her reflection in the dark glass of the window. The frightened, heartbroken woman was gone. In her place was someone she barely recognized. Her eyes were dark with a purpose she had never known. Jasper had made a fatal mistake. He thought he was married to a piece of art, fragile, beautiful, and silent. He was about to find out he was married to a woman who now had the power to burn his world to the ground. Returning to the party was one of the hardest things Eudora had ever done. The elevator ride down felt like a descent from the cold, clear heights of truth back into the perfumed deception of the gala. Every smile directed at her felt like a lie, every polite inquiry a veiled insult. But the evidence on her phone was a physical weight in her purse, a secret power that steadied her nerves. Jasper found her near the grand staircase, his face a mask of irritation. "Where have you been?" "The speeches are starting. I'm about to announce the final funding partner." He glanced at Isabella, who stood a few feet away, radiating triumphant confidence. "This is the most important night of my career, Eudora. Try to look happy for me." The condescension in his voice, which once would have made her shrink, now fanned the flames of her rage. She gave him a slow, serene smile. "Of course, Jasper. I wouldn't miss it for the world." Her calmness seemed to unnerve him more than tears would have. He watched her for a moment, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, before turning and striding toward the small stage that had been set up at the front of the room. Eudora knew she couldn't do this alone. Exposing Jasper required more than just evidence. It required a strategy. There was only one person she could trust, a man who despised Jasper's brand of corporate corruption as much as her own father had Arthur Vance. Arthur was a legend, figure in the city's financial landscape, a former titan of industry who had served on the Croft Holdings board for decades out of loyalty to Jasper's father. He had retired a few years ago after a bitter falling out with Jasper over his aggressive, ethically questionable business practices. Arthur had always been kind to Eudora, seeing in her a reflection of the integrity her father had possessed. She found him by the windows observing the party with a look of weary disdain. He was an older man, with a shock of white hair and eyes that had seen everything. "Arthur," she said, her voice low, "I need your help." He turned, and his expression softened when he saw her. "Eudora, my dear, I was sorry to hear about your father. This must be difficult for you." "It's more difficult than you know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Jasper is not the man you think he is. He's not even the man his father was." Arthur gave a short, humorless laugh. "I am well aware of that. Jasper has the ambition of his father, but none of the honor. What has he done?" There, in the relative quiet of the corner, Eudora told him everything. She spoke of the affair, the divorce papers, and then the financial fraud. She showed him the photographs on her phone. As he scrolled through the images of the ledger, his face grew darker and darker, his jaw tightening with a cold fury. "The pension fund," he whispered, his voice thick with disgust. "He's gutting the employees' retirement to fund this vanity project. He's leveraging the futures of thousands of families for his own glory. This is monstrous." "I know," Eudora said, "but I don't know what to do. If I go to the press, his lawyers will bury me. If I confront him, he'll destroy me." Arthur looked from the phone back to her face, and for the first time that night, Eudora saw not pity, but profound respect in someone's eyes. "You have your father's courage, Eudora, and his intelligence. You haven't come to me for tears. You've come to me for a weapon." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, before landing on Jasper, who was now laughing with a group of investors. "Jasper's greatest weakness," Arthur said, "is his arrogance. He believes he is untouchable. He needs to be brought down, not in a quiet boardroom, but in front of the very people whose admiration he craves. He needs to be publicly humiliated." A plan began to form between them, spoken in urgent, hushed tones. Arthur knew the inner workings of the company, the key players, the regulatory bodies. He knew exactly which investors in the room had the most to lose and who would turn on Jasper the fastest. "He's going to make a grand speech," Arthur strategized. "He will praise his own genius, and then I suspect he will announce Isabella Ricci not just as a partner, but as the cornerstone of his new vision. That's his moment of triumph, and that is when you will strike." "How?" Eudora asked, her heart racing. "He will try to silence you, but I will make a call. The evidence you have is enough for the SEC to act. By the time you're done speaking, it will be too late for him to spin the narrative. The truth will be out." He gave her a firm, reassuring look. "But you must be the one to deliver the blow. It has to be you." The idea was terrifying. To stand up in front of this powerful crowd, to confront the man who had controlled her life for so long, it seemed impossible. But then she thought of the quiet dignity of her father, the stolen futures of the Croft employees, and the cold, smug certainty on Isabella's face. The fear didn't vanish, but it was eclipsed by a powerful, righteous anger. "He's going to call me to the stage," Eudora said, a sudden, chilling premonition washing over her. He'll do it, to make a point, to show me off one last time, before he discards me. Then let him, Arthur said, his voice grim. Let him set his own stage for his own execution. He squeezed her hand. Go on now. Let him think you are the dutiful, silent wife. Let him underestimate you one last time. It will be the last mistake he ever makes. Eudora nodded, taking a deep breath. She felt as though she were preparing for battle. As she turned back toward the center of the room, she smoothed down her emerald dress, the dress he hated, the dress that represented her past. But she would wear it as she secured her future. It was no longer just a dress. It was her banner. The lights in the observatory dimmed, and a single spotlight focused on the stage. A hush fell over the crowd as Jasper Croft, radiating charisma, stepped up to the microphone. He looked every inch the conquering hero, the master of the universe. Friends, colleagues, visionaries. His voice boomed, smooth and confident. Thank you for joining me on this monumental evening. We are not just here tonight to celebrate a building of steel and glass. We are here to celebrate a new future for this city. A future we are building together. The Olympus Project is more than a name. It is a promise of innovation, luxury, and unparalleled vision. Eudora stood near the edge of the crowd, Chloe at her side for moral support. Arthur, a discreet but solid presence a few feet away. She watched Jasper, this man she had once loved, and felt nothing but a profound, icy distance. He was a stranger performing a well-rehearsed role. He spoke for 10 minutes, weaving a grand narrative of ambition and success. He thanked his board, his investors, the city officials who had greased the wheels for his project. It was a masterclass in public relations, full of soaring rhetoric and carefully crafted humility. Eudora could feel the energy in the room building, the guests captivated by his performance. They believed him. They were investing in him, in his vision. But a vision, Jasper continued, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, is nothing without the right partners. It requires shedding the old, the sentimental, the things that hold us back, and embracing a future that is bold, dynamic, and fearless. His eyes swept the room and landed directly on Eudora. Her heart gave a painful thud. This was it. The public dismissal couched in the language of progress. And of course, he said with a practiced smile, a man's vision is supported by those closest to him. I'd like to ask my wife Eudora to join me on stage. A polite, scattered applause rippled through the room. Chloe squeezed her arm. You can do this, she whispered fiercely. Walking towards the stage felt like moving through water. Every eye was on her, and she could feel their pity, their curiosity. She held her head high, her steps measured and deliberate. As she reached the stage, Jasper took her hand. His grip was like iron, his smile a rictus of false affection. My beautiful wife Eudora, he said to the crowd, keeping her hand in his. A talented artist, a lover of history, a reminder of where we've been. The subtext was clear to everyone who knew the rumors. He was framing her as the past, a relic to be honored before being put away. He then turned his attention to the other side of the stage. And now I want to introduce the future, the driving force behind the technology that will make Olympus a living, breathing entity. A true visionary, a leader and a partner in every sense of the word. Please welcome the brilliant CEO of Ricci Innovations, Isabella Ricci. The applause was thunderous as Isabella ascended the stage, a vision in crimson. She moved with the fluid grace of a panther, her eyes shining with triumph. She shook Jasper's hand, but her gaze flickered to Eudora, a small victorious smirk playing on her lips. She was so sure she had won. The three of them stood on the stage, the husband, the wife, and the mistress, a perfect volatile tableau of betrayal. The air crackled with unspoken tension. Jasper raised his champagne glass, and so I want to propose a toast, not just to the Olympus project, but to new beginnings, to the future, to the partnerships that will define it. He clinked his glass with Isabella's. As an afterthought, he turned to Eudora, who stood frozen beside him. He gestured for her to raise her glass. She didn't move. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He leaned in his voice, a venomous whisper meant only for her. Play your part, Eudora. One last time. She finally met his eyes, and what he saw there seemed to startle him. There was no fear, no pain, only a calm, chilling stillness. He continued to smile for the crowd, but his grip on her arm tightened. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. He needed to re-establish his dominance, to put her back in her place, one final time. With a theatrical, charming laugh, he said to the audience, "My wife is so overcome with emotion. She's speechless." He turned to her, his smile never wavering. "Let's give her a hand, shall we?" He began to applaud, and as he brought his hands together, he deliberately hooked his expensive shoe on the delicate, decades-old hem of her emerald dress. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. A slight snag. But Jasper didn't stop. As he took a small, calculated step back, still applauding his own cruel joke, he put his full weight on the fabric. Eudora felt the pull, a sharp, violent tug at her waist. And then came the sound. It was not loud, but in the expectant silence of the room, it was utterly obscene. A dry, rasping rip, the sound of silk lovingly preserved for over 70 years giving way. It tore from the hem all the way up to her hip, the vintage fabric surrendering with a finality that echoed the destruction of her marriage. A collective gasp swept through the observatory. The polite smiles froze on the faces of the guests. The applause died instantly. Everyone stared, mesmerized by the quiet horror of the moment. The emerald dress, her armor, her banner hung in tatters around her, a jagged line of ruin exposing her leg from ankle to thigh. Isabella Ricci's triumphant smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of shock, and beneath it, a sliver of smug satisfaction. This was the ultimate humiliation, a public branding of Eudora, as used, discarded, and broken. Jasper looked down at the torn dress, then back up at Eudora's face. The charming mask fell away for a second, revealing the naked contempt beneath. He leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear, his whisper a drop of pure poison. "See, I told you that old thing was fragile. Time for something new." He expected her to crumble. He expected tears, a choked sob, a hurried, shameful exit from the stage, leaving him and Isabella as the victors. It was the scene he had written in his mind, the perfect, brutal end to their chapter. But Eudora did not cry. She did not run. She stood perfectly still for a long moment, the torn silk fluttering around her in the conditioned air. She looked down at the ruined dress, the last tangible piece of her grandmother of her past. A profound and terrible calm settled over her. Jasper hadn't just torn a piece of fabric. He had torn away the last vestiges of the timid, compliant woman she used to be. He had ripped open the cage, and now she was free. A slow, deliberate smile touched her lips. It was a terrifying smile, holding no warmth, no humor. It was the smile of a person who had absolutely nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The crowd watched, utterly bewildered by her reaction. Jasper's smirk faltered. This was not in his script. He had expected a victim. He was facing a survivor. Her eyes clear and cold as ice lifted from the wreckage of her dress and met his. She saw him for what he was, not a titan, not a king, but a petty, insecure man whose power was built on the humiliation of others. Without breaking eye contact with him, she reached over and took the microphone from its stand. Her hand was perfectly steady. The weight of it felt solid, real. It was a conduit for the voice he had tried so hard to silence. The room was so quiet that the faint hum of the building's ventilation system was audible. Jasper took a step toward her, his face darkening with rage. "Eudora, what do you think you're doing?" he hissed. She ignored him. She turned to face the hundreds of stunned guests, her gaze sweeping across their faces. She saw their shock, their pity, their morbid curiosity. She held the microphone to her lips. Her voice, when it came, was not a whisper or a scream. It was clear, steady and resonant, carrying to every corner of the silent room. "My husband is right," she began the words, cutting through the tension. "It is time for something new, and it's important to be honest about what we're celebrating tonight." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Jasper's face had gone pale. Isabella watched her with narrowed, suddenly anxious eyes. "This isn't just a launch party for the Olympus project," Eudora continued, her voice gaining strength. "It's also an engagement party." A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the audience. She let them wonder for a moment, building the suspense. Then she turned her head slightly, her gaze falling first on her husband, then moving deliberately coldly to the woman in the crimson dress standing beside him. "An engagement party for my husband, Jasper Croft," she said, her voice dropping for the final devastating blow. "And his mistress, Isabella Ricci." The two names, Jasper Croft and Isabella Ricci, hung in the air, woven together not in a toast, but in an indictment. For a split second, the universe of the party held its breath, suspended in disbelief. Then the silence shattered. It wasn't a gradual murmur. It was an instantaneous explosion of sound. 100 private conversations erupted at once, a cacophony of gasps, shocked whispers, and nervous laughter as guests turned to one another, their eyes wide. The atmosphere, once thick with champagne-fueled adulation, was now electric with scandal. Isabella's carefully constructed composure disintegrated. The blood drained from her face, leaving her crimson dress to mock her deathly pallor. Her hand, which had been resting confidently on her hip, flew to her throat in a gesture of pure instinctual panic. This was not how her victory was supposed to look. She was supposed to be anointed, not accused. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but she was trapped on stage, pinned by the gazes of 1,000 eyes. Jasper, reacting with the feral speed of a cornered predator, lunged for the microphone. His face, moments before a portrait of smug success, was now a twisted mask of incandescent rage. "That's enough, Eudora," he snarled, his voice a low growl that was still audible to those nearby. "Security, get her off the stage." "She's hysterical." Eudora sidestepped his clumsy grab with a dancer's grace, her body moving with a fluid purpose that belied the tatters of her dress. She held the microphone firmly, her knuckles white, and met his fury with an unnerving calm. She leaned into the mic, her voice cutting cleanly through the rising chaos. "Hysterical?" She repeated the single word, dripping with irony. The crowd quieted again, eager for the next act of this unforeseen drama. It's a convenient word, isn't it? The one men like you have always used to silence women who speak a truth you don't want to hear. She turned her gaze from her husband to the sea of fascinated, horrified faces. "I assure you all I am not hysterical. I have never been more clear-headed in my entire life. I am simply finished with the lies." She let that statement settle a promise of more revelations to come. Jasper stood frozen, his powerlessness in this moment a stark and foreign feeling. He was used to commanding rooms not being a prisoner within them. "You all stand here tonight," Eudora continued, her voice resonating with a newfound steely authority, "ready to invest your millions in this man's vision. You celebrate his audacity. But do you know what this grand vision is truly built upon? It's not built on genius. It's built on theft." The word theft landed with the force of a physical blow. The investors in the crowd, men and women who managed billions of dollars, stiffened. This was no longer just a juicy marital dispute. It was an attack on the very foundation of their world money. The Olympus project isn't just being funded by legitimate capital. She declared, her eyes scanning the front rows, picking out the faces of the key financial backers. Its seed money, its very foundation was stolen. It was taken from the people you never see, from the secretaries who manage your calendars, from the janitors who clean your offices after you've gone home, from the construction crews who have risked their lives building this city for 40 years. It was stolen from the Croft Holdings Employee Pension Fund. An audible wave of shock rolled through the room. This was an accusation of such magnitude, so utterly ruinous that it seemed impossible. Yet the conviction in Eudora's voice was absolute. "He created a shell corporation," she went on, her delivery precise and damning. "A phantom company called Aegis Development Group, conveniently registered in the Cayman Islands, where secrets are easy to keep. Over the last 18 months, my husband has illegally siphoned more than $90 million from the retirement accounts of his own loyal workers. He is gambling their futures, their hopes for a dignified old age, to build this glass monument to his own ego." Jasper finally found his voice, shouting over her lies. These are the desperate, pathetic lies of a scorned woman. But his denials were drowned out by the rising tide of panic. An investor in the front row, a notoriously ruthless hedge fund manager named Marcus Thorne, bellowed, "Answer the question, Croft. Is this true? Did you use the pension funds?" Before Jasper could formulate a response, a calm, authoritative voice spoke from the edge of the crowd. Arthur Vance, his white hair gleaming in the spotlight's glare, stepped forward. Every head turned towards him. His reputation for integrity was legendary, his word as good as gold. "She is telling the truth," Arthur stated, his voice steady and grave. The room fell into a dead silence. As a former board member with oversight privileges, I was alerted to certain discrepancies. What Eudora has uncovered is horrifyingly accurate. The evidence is irrefutable, and I have already taken the liberty of forwarding a complete file to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the District Attorney's Office. It was a death sentence. The mention of the SEC was the final nail in the coffin. Chaos erupted anew, but this time it was laced with fear. Investors were scrambling, pulling out their phones, furiously texting their lawyers and brokers. Shouts of "fraud" and "I'm ruined" echoed through the opulent hall. The party was over. The feeding frenzy had begun. Amid the pandemonium, Eudora had one last piece of business. Her gaze moved from Jasper's ashen face to Isabella, who was trying to inch away from the stage to melt back into the crowd like a phantom. "And you, Isabella!" Eudora's voice rang out a final piercing note that froze the other woman in place. Isabella turned slowly, her face a mask of pure terror. "Don't think you're just the other woman in this story. Your innovative company's initial investment was the first installment of that stolen money laundered through your accounts. You knew exactly where the money was coming from. You're not just a mistress, you're a co-conspirator." Isabella visibly flinched, as if she had been physically struck. Her career, her reputation, her entire life's work, all of it incinerated in that single public accusation. Eudora looked at the carnage she had wrought, at Jasper surrounded by a mob of his furious, betrayed investors, at Isabella standing utterly alone, a pariah in a blood-red dress. She felt a profound, quiet sense of justice. Her work was done. She let the microphone fall from her hand. It hit the stage with a heavy, resonant thud that seemed to punctuate the end of an era. With the tatters of her emerald dress trailing behind her, like the flag of a victorious, weary warrior, she walked to the edge of the stage and descended the steps. The crowd, a chaotic swirl of panic and fury, just moments before, parted for her. They stared at her with a new expression, a mixture of shock, awe, and perhaps even fear. She was no longer the pitiable wife. She was an avenging force of nature. She met no one's eye, her head held high, her back straight. She walked through the grand ballroom, past the half-empty glasses of champagne and the fallen canapes, a silent, graceful figure moving through the ruins she had created. As the enormous glass doors of the observatory hissed open before her, she stepped out into the quiet of the lobby, the sounds of chaos fading behind her. And through the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, she saw them a silent, synchronized ballet of flashing red and blue lights ascending the avenue far below. The law was coming for Jasper Croft. The reckoning was complete. The implosion of Jasper Croft's world was not a quiet affair. It was a public spectacle of breathtaking proportions. The story became the city's obsession, a modern-day morality play, served up in daily installments by a ravenous media. Eudora, in the taxi she had hailed in a daze, saw the first news vans screaming towards the skyscraper as she was speeding away from it. She didn't look back. Her reflection in the window showed a woman in a ruined dress. Her face pale, but her eyes burning with a terrible newfound clarity. By the time her flight to Florence was ascending over the Atlantic, the name Eudora Croft was on the lips of millions transformed overnight, from a footnote in society pages to the heroine or villain depending on the headline of a corporate drama. She landed in Italy, a ghost deliberately untethering herself from the life that had nearly suffocated her. She didn't watch the news or read the papers, but the fallout was impossible to escape entirely. Headlines screamed from newsstands. She passed on her way to the market. Croft CEO arrested for pension fraud. The all caps a testament to the scale of his hubris. Another showed a grainy photo of Isabella Ricci being escorted from her office by federal agents, her face a mask of disbelief. The mistress and the millions. Ricci Innovations implicated. The Olympus project, once hailed as Jasper's magnum opus, became a tombstone, a half-started construction site, entangled in litigation and ruin. For Eudora, Florence was a sanctuary. She rented a small, airy apartment in the Oltrarno district, a place with terracotta floors and a balcony that overlooked a jumble of ancient rooftops. Here, the only empire that mattered was the one built by the Medici, the only scandal centuries old, immortalized in marble and oil paint. The first few weeks were a blur of sleep and silence. The adrenaline that had carried her through that night finally receded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. She was unlearning the constant low-level fear she had lived with for years, teaching her muscles to unclench her breathing, to deepen. Slowly, she began to emerge. Her days found a new rhythm, dictated not by a social calendar, but by her own soul's quiet longing. She would wake with the morning sun, buy fresh bread and peaches from a local market, and then lose herself in the city. She spent hours in the Uffizi Gallery, sitting before Botticelli's Primavera, not as an art historian analyzing technique, but as a woman relearning the language of beauty and grace. She rediscovered the simple, profound joy of her passion. In the quiet halls of the Laurentian Library, surrounded by Michelangelo's architecture and the scent of ancient paper, she felt a connection to something larger and more enduring than Jasper's fleeting fragile power. She was not Jasper Croft's wife. She was Eudora, a scholar, a lover of art, a person whole and separate. The trial was a distant storm she monitored from the calm of her Florentine haven. Sitting in a small cafe, the aroma of espresso mingling with the sweet Tuscan air, she would read the updates on a small laptop. She read about Jasper's arrogance in the courtroom, his attempts to paint her as an unstable, vengeful liar. But the evidence was irrefutable, a cold, hard chain of numbers and transactions that told a story of greed and betrayal no lawyer could spin. When the verdict came in, guilty on all counts, a sentence of 20 years in federal prison, Eudora felt no surge of triumph, no satisfying thirst for vengeance quenched. There was only a quiet, somber finality. It was the closing of a heavy book, its last page written. She closed her laptop, paid for her coffee, and walked to the Arno River. Feeling the sun on her face, a free woman. Months later, a thick envelope forwarded by her discreet lawyer in New York arrived at her post office box. She recognized Jasper's aggressive, slanting handwriting immediately. Her first instinct was to throw it unread into the river. But she knew she had to face this last ghost. Sitting on a stone bench in the Bobo de Boli Gardens, surrounded by the scent of roses and cypress, she slit it open. The letter was 12 pages of undiluted narcissism. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, a testament to a man utterly incapable of introspection. He never once apologized. Instead, he blamed her, the bored Arthur Vance, the jealous media. He wrote of his own suffering in prison, the indignity of it all. He recounted their early days together, twisting shared memories into a narrative of her inadequacy and his generosity. The final pages were the most delusional, a desperate, pathetic plea for her to use her newfound fame to advocate for him, to help him appeal, to tell the world it was all a terrible mistake. "We were a team, Ellie," he wrote. "You owe me this." Eudora read the last line, and a small, humorless laugh escaped her lips. He still didn't get it. He never would. He saw her not as a human being he had wounded, but as a possession that had rebelled. She carefully folded the letter, walked to the Ponte Vecchio as the sun began to set, and lit a corner of the pages with a match. She held it until the flames nearly licked her fingertips, then dropped the burning curling paper into the river below. She watched as the last glowing embers hissed and vanished into the dark, flowing water, taking the final remnants of her past life with them. 2 years after that night, London was a city alive with a crisp autumn energy. In a chic, minimalist gallery in the Mayfair district, Eudora was the center of a captivated audience. The Gallery Provenance was hers. She had built it from the ground up, pouring her inheritance and her soul into creating a space renowned for its integrity and expertise in authenticating and restoring historical art. She moved with an easy, understated confidence, dressed in a simple, elegant black dress, her only jewelry, a pair of pearl earrings her father had given her. She was speaking to a small group of clients about a 17th century painting her firm had just rescued from obscurity. Her voice was passionate, her knowledge encyclopedic, her love for her work radiating from her. A man at the edge of the group watched her, his expression one of quiet admiration. He was an architect in town for a conference who had wandered in, drawn by the painting in the window. When her talk concluded, he approached her, his smile gentle and unassuming. "What you do is amazing," he said, his eyes meeting hers directly. "You don't just restore paintings, you bring stories back to life." Eudora met his gaze and offered a genuine, unguarded smile, a smile that reached her eyes. "I believe every piece of art has a soul," she replied, her voice soft but sure. "Sometimes it just gets buried under layers of dirt and neglect. It just needs to be carefully uncovered." As she spoke the words, she felt their profound personal truth. She too had been buried, obscured under the weight of a gilded cage. But she had done the painstaking work. She had chipped away at the lies, cleaned away the fear, and restored the vibrant, strong, and brilliant woman who had been there all along. The architect saw a woman who ran a beautiful gallery. But Eudora knew the truth. Her life itself was her greatest restoration project. And it was finally a masterpiece. Eudora's story is a powerful reminder that the most devastating betrayals can sometimes forge the most unbreakable strength. She walked into that party as a forgotten wife, and walked out as the architect of her own liberation. Her journey shows us that true power isn't found in wealth or status, but in the courage to speak the truth, even when your voice shakes. She proved that dignity is the one jewel that can never be bought or torn away. If you were moved by Eudora's incredible story of justice and rebirth, please show your support by hitting that like button. For more stories of karma resilience and the indomitable human spirit, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. What did you think of Jasper's public downfall? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Thank you for listening.